The sharp clink of the glass against the railing drew a few glances, but Sebastian didn't notice. He held the crystal between his fingers with the same firmness he used to handle million-dollar contracts, the champagne swaying gently as he watched the parade below from above. The pounding of the drums reverberated through his whole body, but to him it sounded distant, just background noise to the muffled conversations of businessmen and socialites sharing the VIP box. Impeccable in a tailored charcoal grey suit, his tie perfectly aligned, he kept his shoulders straight and his chin slightly raised, as if the world were a stage he observed with calm calculation. But his light eyes didn't shine, not with excitement. They seemed to analyze, measure, more than be swept away. Down below, a sea of green and pink surged through the Sapukai with force. Feathers, glitter, and smiles lit up every seat in the stands. Then something disrupted the rhythm. From the side of one of the floats, a metallic crack blended into the sound of the drums. Part of the structure gave way, swaying dangerously. A woman came running down the side aisle, her skin glowing from sweat and the intense lights of the spotlights. Her slender body moved with urgency and precision, adorned with green feathers that fluttered with each step. Amanda. Without wasting a second, she grabbed the fallen part of the structure and shouted instructions to others trying to help. 2 young men in volunteer shirts and 3 children who looked like they were part of a youth section. "Lift it higher! Hold it tight!" Her voice was steady, but her breathing betrayed the effort. Her face was focused, makeup beginning to melt in the heat, yet her eyes caught every detail. Sebastian raised the glass to his lips, watching the scene with the cold detachment of someone assessing a deal. His brows drew together for a moment. Without realizing he was speaking aloud, he muttered, "Lack of preparation." Luciana, a woman with curly hair tied up in a high bun and a simple black dress, who was watching from the neighboring box, turned her head toward him. The look she gave him needed no words, pure contempt. Down below, Amanda managed to stabilize the structure. She took a deep breath, adjusted her headpiece and lifted her chin, scanning to make sure everything was back in place. That's when her eyes met his. For a second, the sound of the drums seemed to fade. There was judgment in her gaze and a hint of curiosity. The parade continued, but Sebastian kept his eyes on her, no longer as a mere spectator. Minutes later, the school wrapped up its performance. Backstage, the scene was chaotic. Hugs, tears, laughter, crowded hallways. Amanda appeared near the VIP area, carrying a large fabric bag. Her destination was clear, the tech section, but her path crossed Sebastian's. Almost automatically, he repeated in a controlled tone, as if confirming it to himself, "Truly, a lack of preparation." Amanda stopped, straightened her shoulders, took 2 steps closer, and looked him straight in the eye. Up close, details became visible that distance had hidden. Tiny freckles on her cheekbones, a spark of defiance in her gaze. Her voice came steady, low, so it wouldn't be drowned out by the noise around them. "Disorganization is not knowing when someone needs you." She didn't wait for a reply. She walked past him and disappeared into the crowd filling the hallways. For a few moments, Sebastian stood still, feeling the weight of words he hadn't expected to hear. The champagne in his glass had already gone flat. He set the glass down on the counter and, without telling anyone, left the box. The narrow hallways smelled of sweat, glue, and fresh paint. People were running in all directions, some carrying costumes, others adjusting props. Shouts, laughter, and orders blended into an improvised choreography. He moved forward without hurry, eyes always alert. Then, turning a corner, he saw her again. Amanda was crouched down, helping a girl of about 8 fix her wings, which had come loose. The child smiled shyly as Amanda gently adjusted the elastic. Sebastian stopped a few feet away, watching. One step closer and he'd draw attention. One step back and he'd miss the moment. He stood there, motionless, feeling something he couldn't name. Amanda finished, kissed the girl's forehead, and stood up, vanishing into the group of performers still rushing to put things away and organize the space. He took a deep breath, like someone waking from a trance, and without realizing it, he was smiling, a brief, reserved smile, but different, a smile he hadn't worn in a long time. The continuous sound of waves crashing against the sand broke the silence of the room. Sebastian rested his hands on the balcony railing. his eyes fixed on the horizon, where the sea melted into the pale blue morning sky. The sun reflected off the surface like tiny blades of light, but to him there was no shine. His white shirt, slightly unbuttoned at the collar, revealed the tension in his shoulders and the automatic posture of someone more used to thinking than feeling. The salty scent of the air mixed with the gentle aroma of coffee coming from inside the room. He stepped away from the balcony, walked to the table and poured himself a cup. As he brought the coffee to his lips, the image of the previous night's parade returned insistently. Amanda's steady gaze, the short sentence that had left an unexpected mark. He took a slow sip, trying to push the thought away, but a memory from years ago resurfaced. They were in Tuscany. The sun stretched across lavender fields, and a soft breeze carried the sweet scent of the flowers. His wife, Isabella, laughed with her face turned toward the wind, her brown hair dancing on her shoulders. They were walking along a narrow road lined with cypress trees, and she was talking about the small towns she wanted to visit. He watched her, but even then, his mind was already calculating meetings, deadlines, and investments. He remembered thinking there would be plenty of time to enjoy all of it later. The memory shattered abruptly. Isabella on the living room floor, pale, her lips nearly colorless. He was on his knees, phone in hand, calling for emergency services. Then silence, the heavy silence of a house far too big for just one person. Sebastian blinked a few times, returning to the present. The coffee in his cup was going cold. He sat down but couldn't focus on anything. In the background, a group of guests was chatting lively in the restaurant. A woman's voice stood out. Mangueira's community work is incredible. They help kids, offer classes, support whole families. A brief pause, followed by a man's voice. And they do it all with almost nothing. Sebastian kept his eyes on the coffee, but the conversation sparked something in him. Mangueira. The name brought back the image of Amanda again, not just the dancer in the middle of the avenue, but her helping the little girl backstage. By late morning, he went down to the front desk and asked for a car. He didn't say where he was going. Once inside, he gave the address he had memorized minutes earlier, when the waiter had casually mentioned where the samba school held its rehearsals and community programs. The street was narrow, lined with simple houses and buildings, some with faded facades worn by time. When the car stopped in front of the community center, Sebastian saw children running along the sidewalk and women carrying cloth bags. Inside, the sound of a tambourine echoed, rhythmic but light. He stepped in. The air was thick with the smell of glue, paint, and fabric. Amanda was there, a few feet away, helping a group of teenagers organize costume pieces on makeshift shelves. Her body moved naturally, her posture upright even as she bent down to pick something up. When she noticed him, she showed no surprise or interest. She simply continued her work as if he weren't there. Luciana, who had also been in the VIP box the night before, approached him, a cloth in her hands and a light sheen of sweat on her forehead. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her tone not openly hostile but laced with suspicion. Sebastian kept his gaze steady. "I came to see the work." Luciana crossed her arms. "See it?" She let out a short, humorless laugh. "You people come, take a photo, write a pretty post, and then forget we exist." He didn't respond right away. He glanced at Amanda, who was now helping a young boy adjust his costume, then turned his eyes back to Luciana. "I didn't come to take a photo." The woman lifted her chin, as if trying to see how far he'd go with that statement. Saying nothing more, she shrugged and went back to what she was doing. Amanda, for her part, never lost focus on her task. Sebastian stayed there for a few minutes, taking in the atmosphere. People moved about, carrying materials, talking in hushed voices, occasionally laughing. There was life in that place, but it wasn't chaotic. It was a different kind of order, one shaped by necessity and routine, not by framed rules hung in office buildings. As he walked back to the car, he felt something unusual, the desire to return. He couldn't say if it was to better understand the work, or to once again see Amanda's defiant gaze. Maybe it was both. The box slipped from Sebastian's hands and hit the ground with a dull thud. He immediately crouched down to gather the spilled bags of rice and beans, feeling the weight not just in his arms, but in his pride. He wasn't used to carrying anything other than leather briefcases or expensive luggage, let alone in humid heat that made his shirt cling to his back. All around him, there was constant motion. Children ran back and forth, women rotated between giant pots and plastic tables, and a few men unloaded a truck full of supplies. He had arrived at the community center that morning intending to help, after days of reflecting on his conversation with Luciana and Amanda's silent refusal. Before that, the day prior, Sebastian had tried a faster route. He reached out to Mangueira's leadership and offered a generous donation, enough to cover costumes and infrastructure for the entire next parade. The response came through Amanda, direct and without sugarcoating. Help comes from hands, not checks. That sentence echoed in his mind all night. He wasn't used to hearing no to a proposal like that. In his world, money solved problems. Here, apparently, it wasn't enough. So that morning, he showed up in a plain t-shirt, lightweight pants and sneakers, ready to pitch in. But every time he passed by with a box or a bag, he felt quick glances assessing his movements, as if people were measuring whether he really knew what he was doing or if he'd quit at the first sign of sweat. Marcos, a man with dark skin and an easy smile, approached as they stacked sacks of flour. He had the build of someone who'd carried plenty of weight in life and the ease of someone who knew how to talk without trying. "They only trust people who show up all the time," he said, adjusting the cap on his head. "Folks who come once and disappear. We see that every year." Sebastian glanced at Amanda, who was just a few feet away, helping two women cut large pieces of fabric. "So what makes someone believe?" he asked. Marcos shrugged. "Time and work." There was no judgment in his tone, just a statement of fact. Still, Sebastian felt the impact of those words. He had always been a man of swift action, used to immediate results. Now he seemed to be in a game of patience he didn't know how to play. By mid-afternoon, he helped serve meals to a group of children. The smell of beans, rice, and roasted chicken filled the hall. A girl with braids and a floral dress smiled shyly as she received her plate from his hands. For a moment, something inside him loosened, but it didn't last. Another child tugged Amanda's arm to show her a torn costume, and she walked away without even glancing in his direction. Sebastian kept serving, but he felt the lack of control, like a new kind of weight. In his world, he decided where and how to act. Here, he was just another pair of hands. When the day ended, he sat on the concrete bench in front of the center, his body tired in a way he hadn't felt in years. The sun was already low, tinting the sky orange and pink. Amanda walked past him, carrying a pile of fabric in her arms. She said nothing, just went inside. He stayed there, watching the door close, with the sense that something important was happening, not inside the center, but inside himself. And for the first time in a long time, he wasn't sure how to take the next step. The sound of tambourines echoed loudly, vibrating in the chest of anyone passing through the backstage area. Sebastian was holding a wooden beam alongside two other volunteers, helping to support a section of the structure that needed to be repositioned before the second day of the parade began. Sweat ran down his neck, but he didn't let go of the beam until it was secured in place. When someone called out, "It's steady," he stepped back and wiped his face with his forearm. That's when, amid the rush of costumes and props, he saw Amanda. She was moving in the opposite direction, walking quickly, her short dancer's outfit covered by a light robe, her hair tied up on top of her head. Her eyes paused on him for a few seconds, and this time there was no coldness. There was surprise, and subtly, a smile. Not a wide smile, but enough to stir something unfamiliar in him, as if he'd just been recognized for something beyond his last name or his bank account. Later, back behind the scenes, they ran into each other again. The noise from the avenue seemed distant there. Amanda was adjusting the strap of a golden sandal, sitting on a wooden crate when he approached. "You looked at home back there," she said, a tone of curiosity mixed with a hint of teasing. He sat on the crate next to her, keeping a respectful distance. "I don't have much experience with wood and screws, but I'm learning." Amanda let out a soft laugh, fixing one of the feathers that had come loose from her costume. "Mangueira saved my childhood." Her voice dropped slightly, but it never lost its strength. I was just another girl on a dangerous street. This place gave me discipline, gave me a purpose, and a place to dance. Sebastian tilted his head slightly, listening without interrupting. She rarely spoke about herself, and he knew that wasn't something you got by pressing. "And you?" Amanda asked, her gaze direct. "What brings an American millionaire to carry boxes in the Rio heat?" He took a moment before answering, ran his hand through his hair as if organizing his thoughts. "My wife died 3 years ago." There was no drama in his tone, just a statement of fact. "After that, I shut down. I stopped being present. It was just work, meetings, travel, until..." He took a breath. "Until a dancer told me that disorganization is not knowing when someone needs you." Amanda looked at him for a moment, recognizing her own words. She didn't smile this time, but her gaze softened. "To dance," she said, adjusting her sandal and standing up. "Sometimes you have to lose control." He followed her with his eyes as she walked off to join her section. The phrase stayed with him like a challenge, but also like an invitation to something he didn't yet fully understand. That night, as Manguera entered the avenue, Sebastian remained backstage, helping wherever he could. Each time he saw Amanda dance, he felt a different rhythm, guiding not just the samba school, but something inside him as well. A new tempo, one that didn't rely on numbers, contracts, or deadlines. The audio messages started flooding the sewing group chat, and Luciana's phone vibrated across the table, sliding to the edge before she caught it with one hand, scissors in the other, eyes squinting as she listened to the sped-up voice note over the hum of sewing machines. Within seconds, more notifications piled up, forming an impatient chorus of short pings. 2 seamstresses stopped pedaling and exchanged glances. A young man in a baseball cap looked up, alert. The phrase emerged, repeated in different voices, as if it were already fact. "The American wants to be on TV helping the community." In the hallway, Sebastian rounded the corner carrying a heavy roll of dark green fabric on his shoulder. He stepped through the door, felt the warm air from the irons and the sharp smell of fresh glue, and noticed the brief silence that followed him, like a wave hitting and pulling back. He set the roll down gently on the workbench, straightened up and simply asked, "Where do you want this one?" No one answered right away. Luciana approached, half reluctantly, not hiding her discomfort. "Just leave it there for now. Section lead will check." She pointed toward a shelf, then lowered her voice. "They're saying you scheduled an interview with a reporter." Sebastian furrowed his brow, calm but firm. "I didn't schedule anything. I came here to work." Marcos walked in right after, arms full of ribbons, and glanced around. He read the tension in the room like a man who could smell a storm coming. He stepped closer to Sebastian and spoke quietly, careful not to fuel the rumors. "Word like that spreads fast. Might be better if you stay out of the pictures today." "I'm already out of the pictures," Sebastian replied, gesturing with his chin toward his paint-stained hands. Marcos nodded, but the rumor had already swept through the center. A boy ran by and whispered to a friend. 2 teenage girls hid a grin as they looked at the American. A woman in an apron made a comment to her neighbor, and the neighbor shook her head like she pitied him. Amanda walked in through the side door, still out of costume, wearing a Manguera t-shirt and workout shorts. Her hair was tied up high, her face bare, her expression focused. The moment she stepped in, 3 people started talking to her at once. She listened to the fragmented versions, raised her hands for calm, and locked eyes with Luciana. Her friend simply showed her phone screen, where a short message was going around. "Gringo is giving an interview to get attention." Amanda walked to the center table, where boxes of costume pieces were stacked, and picked up a clipboard. The motion was sure, like someone returning to familiar ground. Only then did she look up at Sebastian. "I need to talk to you. Now." He nodded without hesitation. He followed her down a narrow hallway into a small storage room, where the sounds of the center were muffled. She shut the door carefully and stood in front of him, keeping just enough space. Her body was tense, but her gaze was clear. "I don't want your help if it's about feeding your ego," she said, without raising her voice. "No one here is set dressing." Sebastian placed his hands on his hips briefly, breathing slow. He didn't flinch. "You've seen me carrying boxes, cutting fabric, sweeping floors. I haven't spoken to a single camera." People are saying you're calling the press, Amanda replied, holding his gaze. And if that's true, I'd rather you stop right here. The words hit like a punch he refused to show. The memory of their first conversation struck with precision. Help comes from hands, not checks. He had followed that. He'd left the comfort, the air conditioning, the distance. He was here covered in glue and paint, his body as tired as anyone else's. And still now, he was accused of seeking the spotlight. You said money isn't everything, he said, steady. I brought my hands. I brought my time. If that's not enough, tell me. It is. When it's real, Amanda replied firmly. Not when it comes with the shadow of intention. Sebastian's jaw tightened. He didn't argue details. Didn't mention rumors, didn't show screenshots, didn't ask who said what. His life had been built on what could be proven and controlled. Here, what mattered was trust, something you can't buy, force, or explain with a spreadsheet. I didn't come for applause. The words were low, without softness. I came because you were right. Being present matters. Amanda gripped the clipboard tighter, her fingers pressing into the cardboard. Being present also means knowing when to step back so you're not in the way. There was a beat of heavy silence. Outside, the noise of machines and conversations rose again, as if to remind them that life moved on, agreement or not. Sebastian straightened his shoulders, his body aligned like someone accepting a decision that didn't need to be spoken. Got it. He gave a small nod, not goodbye, not surrender, just an acknowledgement of the boundary she had drawn. I'm not here to argue rumors. He turned, opened the door and walked back into the corridor. Marcos was nearby, stacking small boxes. He noticed Sebastian's serious face and gave him a quick look, asking silently if everything was okay. Sebastian took a step toward him, stopped, and simply picked up the roll of ribbon on the floor. The tension in his jaw betrayed the weight of the moment, but he didn't offer explanations. I'm leaving, he said, already walking. Owe you one. Marcos tried to slow him down with a short phrase. Sometimes it's better to wait for the dust to settle. I know how to wait, Sebastian replied, not breaking stride. His tone wasn't cold, it was firm. As he passed the sewing table, he met Luciana's eyes. She was holding scissors and for a moment looked like she wanted to say something. She didn't. He kept walking to the front door. He stopped only to set down a pair of rubber gloves on the counter, the ones he had worn that morning. The gesture was simple, almost ritualistic. In the doorway, he felt the hot street air and the smell of sun-baked asphalt. He took a step outside when Amanda's voice cut through the hallway. I'd rather not see you around here anymore. He didn't turn right away. He stood still for a second, letting the words sink in. Then he turned just his head, enough for her to know he'd heard. His gaze wasn't pleading or proud. It was whole, like a man who doesn't shrink or inflate in the face of what he can't control. All right, he said, and turned back to the street. The late afternoon sun burst onto the sidewalk, and the city moved on. Street vendors pushing carts, a motorcycle growling at the corner, a dog lying in the shadow of a wall. Sebastian stepped down the curb, adjusted his t-shirt and began walking, each step heavy, not from the materials he used to carry, but from what he was leaving behind. Even so, his posture didn't falter. Shoulders square, chin up, his pace steady, the walk of someone who knows when it's time to step back without losing direction. Behind him, the center returned to full noise. Amanda placed the clipboard back on the table and held the edge, trying to steady a tremor she didn't want to show. Luciana stepped beside her, close but not intrusive. You really believe it? She asked quietly, that he's chasing cameras. Amanda kept her eyes on the now closed door. The messages in the group chat, the whispers, the memories of broken promises from people who came and vanished, all stacked up like an unstable pile. I believe what I see, she replied, not with ironclad certainty, but with the firmness she could muster in that moment. And today, I saw too much confusion. Luciana nodded, though her eyes held a trace of doubt. Confusion's easy to make even when you don't mean to, she murmured, returning the scissors to her hand. Better get back to work. Amanda took a deep breath, straightened up, and called two girls over to resume the costume adjustments. The practical motion returned rhythm to the room, but the phrase from the hallway lingered on the wall like a handprint. "I'd rather not see you around here anymore." Out on the street, Sebastian turned a corner and stopped beside a utility pole. His phone buzzed with a message, but he didn't answer. He looked up at the sky, where the light was starting to change, and for a second, he closed his eyes, holding back what he wouldn't let spill out. He remembered the night he first heard "help comes from hands, not checks," and how he'd rearranged his schedule, cancelled meetings, traded the silence of his penthouse for the noise of the community center. He remembered today's phrase, sharp and clean. Between the two, the exact space that separates intention from trust. He took a breath, opened his eyes, and moved on. He didn't speed up or slow down, didn't kick a stone, didn't look for a reason. He held the unease in his posture like someone carrying a heavy load with purpose, and walked away, promising nothing to no one. The glare of the television lit up the hotel room, casting long shadows across the wooden floor. Sebastian stood by the bed, eyes fixed on the screen as if every second mattered. The footage showed flames devouring a warehouse. The headline in the corner confirmed it. "Fire hits Mangueira's costume shed. Children's costumes destroyed." The reporter, voice steady, described what the blaze had consumed. Among the images, a quick close-up of a scorched mannequin in a young dancer's costume, its feathers reduced to ash. In the background, firefighters were still hosing down the site, smoke rising thick into the early morning air. Sebastian dropped the remote onto the bed, grabbed his phone, and checked the time. He didn't think twice. He threw on sneakers, a dark t-shirt, and headed downstairs. The hotel driver, surprised by the late-hour request, suggested he wait until morning. Sebastian just gave the address and got in the car. The drive to the community was short, but every red light felt like it stretched the distance. When the car finally stopped, the smell of smoke still hung in the air. Soot stained the sidewalk, and a few exhausted volunteers were hauling trash bags and salvaged scraps of fabric. He walked through the center's gate without drawing attention. There was no music, just the quiet hum of voices and the steady sound of scissors slicing fabric. The seamstresses were gathered around makeshift tables, already remaking what had been lost. An older woman with glasses and her hair pinned up glanced at him over her lenses. She recognized him but said nothing, just pointed toward a corner stacked with fabric and tubs of glue. Sebastian walked over and started sorting usable pieces from the burned ones. Within minutes, his hands were covered in dust and ash. The heat in the room came not just from the muggy night, but from the urgency of those who knew time was running out. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. He took what was handed to him, glued, cut, held pieces in place so someone else could sew. It was deep into the night when Amanda arrived. Her hair was loose, barely held back by a slack tie, her face marked by fatigue. She paused at the doorway for a moment, scanning the room, until her eyes landed on him, bent over a table holding the hem of a costume for a young girl who was stitching. His hands were sticky with glue, and there was a tear in his t-shirt near the shoulder, likely from a piece of exposed wire. Amanda stepped forward, watching silently. He didn't notice her at first. He just kept holding the hem, waiting patiently as the girl finished. When he finally sensed her presence, he looked up but didn't explain. He gave her a small nod and returned to his task. "You..." Amanda started, then stopped. She moved to the table and picked up a pair of scissors. "These need adjusting," she said, pointing to 3 partially assembled costumes. He nodded wordlessly and passed her the pieces he'd just finished. Amanda sat beside him, and they worked in silence. Occasionally, their hands brushed as they reached for a ribbon or scrap. The contact was brief, but it carried something unspoken. Hours passed and the center remained full. The air smelled of fresh glue and new fabric. Amanda stood to grab more supplies, and when she returned, Sebastian was still there, now helping attach green feathers to a headpiece. "You're not leaving?" she asked without sarcasm. "Not before I finish what I started," he said, securing the last wire in place. Her gaze softened. The edge from their last conversation was gone, replaced by the quiet acknowledgement of someone who shows up and doesn't need to prove it. By the time daylight began to creep in, the tables were covered in finished or nearly finished costumes. Amanda stood beside him, holding up a completed piece. "Thank you." The word came simply, without decoration. Sebastian met her eyes for a moment, steady, and nodded. Then he went back to rolling up a spool of ribbon, as if there was still work left to do. The sun was already breaking through the open door when they finally stepped outside. There was no speech, no promise, just the presence of someone who stayed when he could have walked away. The thunder of the drumline echoed down the avenue as Sebastian pushed through the backstage chaos, weaving around cables, supports, and hurried performers. The Champions Parade had already begun, and Manguera was just minutes away from entering. He wasn't there to watch. This time he had a different reason. Amanda was several feet ahead, guiding the children's section, her body holding the weight of an elaborate costume made of feathers and gemstones. With each step, her upright posture masked the strain, but he saw it. The slight stumble, the brief grimace as her right foot faltered. "Amanda!" he called, quickening his pace to reach her. She tried to brush it off, but her slowed movements, adjusting the weight of the costume, gave her away. "Twisted my ankle," she muttered through clenched teeth, never stopping. "I'm fine." Sebastian glanced toward a side corridor. The medical tent was just a few meters away. "Let's step out, I'll take you for treatment." "No way." Her tone was sharp, almost cutting. "This section doesn't go on without me. You can barely put weight on it." His voice was low, but firm. "It's not worth getting hurt over a parade. It is when this is my life." She gripped one of the costume's rods and kept moving. "I'm not sitting out." The section director shouted urgent instructions as the sound of the drums intensified. The lineup moved forward, and there was no time for argument. Sebastian saw two people try to help Amanda, but she waved them off with a quick gesture. That's when he stepped in. "Then I'm going with you." Before she could respond, Sebastian took his place beside her, grabbing one of the side rods of the costume, taking on some of its weight. He felt the structure vibrate with each feather's movement and the force of the music. Amanda glanced at him, surprised, but said nothing. The gates opened. The avenue, bathed in spotlight, became a tunnel of color and sound that swallowed them whole. Amanda kept her smile for the crowd, but he saw the effort in each step. The costume was tall and heavy, and her injured ankle demanded more than her body could offer. Sebastian adjusted his grip, bearing part of the load, guiding the base so she could focus on her essential movements. He didn't look at the stands or the cameras. His focus was the path, 1 meter at a time. Some people noticed. A volunteer yelled for him to let go, but Amanda waved him off with a look that said, "It's fine." And it was, improvised, but working. Halfway down the avenue, when the heat and noise were almost unbearable, Amanda tilted her face toward him without breaking the rhythm. "You didn't have to do this." "Yes, I did," he replied, breath heavy. "I told you I wouldn't let you do this alone." She didn't answer. She just gripped the structure tighter and kept moving forward. The drumline hit the chorus, and the crowd in the stands rose to their feet. The green and pink blended with the gold of the costume, and sweat poured down his face. But Sebastian didn't let go for a second. His arms burned, his legs ached, but his stance stayed solid, because he knew that if he faltered, she'd fall. When the main float reached the end of the avenue, Amanda finally slowed down. He helped her out of the costume, careful not to strain her injured ankle. Out of sight of the crowd, she leaned briefly on his shoulder. "Thank you," she said, not looking directly at him. Sebastian exhaled, running a hand behind his neck. "You don't need to thank me." Amanda looked at him then, and there was something different in her eyes. Not debt, not wounded pride. Recognition. He had pushed his body to the limit, risked his comfort, and asked for nothing in return. As the section gathered at the dispersal area, two friends came to take her for ice and support. He stayed back, watching until she disappeared from view. Only then, as his body finally relaxed, did he feel the true weight of what he had carried. And it wasn't just the costume. The foam of the waves rolled over the sand, wetting Sebastian's bare feet as he walked beside Amanda. The sun was beginning to rise on the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and the soft light reflected on her face, still bearing traces of the night before. Her ankle was bandaged, But Amanda had insisted. She wanted to feel the sand and the morning breeze. They had walked in silence for a few minutes. Sebastian carried her jacket draped over his arm, despite the warm dawn air. The ocean breeze tousled Amanda's loose hair, and from time to time she closed her eyes, as if trying to preserve the moment. "I don't want to go back to New York without knowing what it's like to dance beside you," he said suddenly, his deep voice cutting through the sound of the waves. Amanda glanced at him, caught off guard by the unexpected words. There was no irony in his tone, just honesty. A corner of her mouth curved into a soft smile. "You know I'm not just talking about dancing," he added. "I know." She let out a short laugh, releasing some of the tension that had built up over the last few days. "But with me, it's not just 2 steps forward and 2 steps back. Sometimes the music changes halfway through. I can adapt." Sebastian kept his eyes on hers, as if making sure she heard every word. They kept walking until Amanda stopped, turned to him, and crossed her arms. "You know it's not easy, right? That it's not just about showing up at the parade, holding a costume, and that's it." "I know." He stepped closer, shortening the space between them. "I'm not here for a season. I didn't come to be a tourist." Amanda took a deep breath, looking out at the sea before meeting his eyes again. "Then what did you come here for?" "To stay." The answer was short, but full. "To stay and build something with you." She said nothing for a few seconds, as if weighing the weight of that promise. The waves crept up and soaked both of their feet, and Sebastian didn't break eye contact. "And your life in New York?" she asked, as if needing to be sure he understood what he was choosing. "Business can be managed from anywhere." He adjusted the jacket on his arm. "But what I found here, I won't find anywhere else." Amanda studied him, and this time there were no walls in her eyes. It was as if finally the proof he had offered over the past few days, the silence when accused, the hours of work after the fire, his presence on parade night carrying her pain, had been enough to open a space of trust. She reached out her hand. Sebastian took it firmly, and together they kept walking along the water's edge. There was no rush. The day was beginning, and for the first time, it felt like they had time. When they reached a quieter stretch of beach, Amanda let go of his hand and jogged a few steps ahead, despite the bandaged ankle. She turned, motioning him to follow. "Come on, let's see if you can keep up." Sebastian tossed the jacket into the sand and caught up to her quickly. Amanda began to mark steps to the rhythm of an imaginary drum line, and he, awkward at first, tried to follow. She laughed out loud, grabbing his hands to guide his movements. "Don't think, feel," she said, bringing her face close to his. And so, with the ocean at their feet and the sun rising above them, they danced barefoot in the sand, with no music but the sound of the waves and their shared breath. He wasn't a samba dancer and never would be, but in that moment, to Amanda, Sebastian was in perfect rhythm. The city was slowly waking up behind them, but there on the edge of Copacabana, time felt suspended. There was no crowd, no grandstands, no rumors, just 2 bodies moving together, finding their own rhythm, and choosing, without needing to say it, that this would be the first of many sunrises side by side. Hear what it meant to you. Remember to hit the like and subscribe buttons. This is really important for the channel. Really important. And if you're ready for another story of love and hope, click the first card or the second one to watch the full playlist. See you there.